SLANT was sort of started about 3 years ago. Francisca Sanchez was at the time help me with her title, the academic chief, executive director of academics and professional development, and she and my supervisor Jean Darcy in math science had kind of been talking about how do we get kids more involved and more excited about science, but also just really accessing all students and really bringing the arts through all content areas and make that more accessible and relevant to the kids. And so the idea of sort of science and art coming together as an example, not the only way, but just one way that you could kind of marry the two and have more curricular economy. So one of the goals of this project was to increase educators' confidence in teaching science and art, especially in elementary school. A lot of elementary teachers don't feel comfortable teaching science, don't feel comfortable teaching art. That's not something they were trained in, and so it doesn't happen. And so really trying to provide some tools for them to feel confident. That's okay. And then again, like I said, to make the sciences and the arts accessible to all learners. It's not just because you're taking an art class, it's not just because you happen to have a super dynamo art teacher in your classroom, but that all kids are given the opportunity to play around and experiment with their own artistic process. And linguistically, to really challenge the students to be able to utilize academic vocabulary in different formats. So it's not always on a test, it's not always in a formal presentation, sometimes it's done in a more creative way, and they're given more opportunities to practice. Can you see? Am I standing in your way? Okay. And then, of course, that big achievement gap that everybody talks about, we really believe that if we give students authentic opportunities to learn, that achievement gap is going to change because these students are going to be empowered and want to stay in school and own their learning in a way that they haven't maybe in a traditional classroom. And then increased teaching time, just getting it on the docket and getting it taught in schools is also a goal of the project, to get science and art into the classrooms. So the outcomes of this program was that we wanted to kind of look, arts integration is defined in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people, and the way that we kind of articulated it was looking at process skills that are coming together. So not necessarily looking at discrete content areas that matched, which is another way to integrate, obviously, but looking at kind of what skills are in art and what skills are in science that really cross both disciplines, and really you need both to be successful. And in looking at that, we looked at 21st century skills, which everybody is also talking about, and really consider sort of what is it that we are asking students to be prepared with when they leave high school and go out into college and the workforce and beyond, and sort of what are we asking them to do. And then again, giving both teachers and students, our theory of action is if we really support the teachers with these strategies, then they will in turn be able to impart that with their students. But they need that experience as well and the opportunity to be creative. So here are some kids that are, they're acting out atmospheric pressure. And the other students in the class have to guess which science concept are they illustrating. And they had a lot of fun with that. And also learned a little bit about theatric improv. And the goals are reached by using the creative process and utilizing these creative strategies, which I'll share some of them with you today. Go ahead. These are our teachers. We had 35 K through 8 teachers spanning 16 schools rather, elementary and middle, not high school this year. And 2 of them are here with you today. And here are some of our students. They're doing some investigation with objects. We tried to really bring notebooks to the forefront, so it's not just about doing science, it's also about talking and writing and articulating and communicating science as well as art. So they always had a kind of a writing component that was this metacognitive, reflective opportunity for them to think about their learning. So we had a week-long summer institute last July. The teachers were asked to develop a lesson that with an accompanying assessment, and they participated in a peer review, kind of similar to the process you've experienced today, where their peers kind of looked at their lesson, examined the work, had a discussion, asked some critical questions, and then they went back to refine their lesson. And then after they taught it, they came back and shared it again to get more feedback. And then 3 academic year follow-ups with ongoing coaching. We delve a little deeper into some of the creative strategies that we'll share with you. And then these 2 teachers, as well as 2 other middle school teachers, stepped up to become these focal teachers, where they went above and beyond what we asked the other teachers to do. And they chose a research question that they were examining in their own practice that they were working on. And we supported them in developing, collecting data and documenting their teaching practice. And part of that was really just to honor the profession and be able to present it in a public way in a forum like this or somewhere else, but also just to really give teachers the time to think critically about their own practice, because they never have a chance to really think and talk about what they're doing and how it's working. And you can ask them questions about that when I'm done with my spiel. Yeah, and they have some work to do. And so last Wednesday we just had this big event where Michael and Lindsay and Liz and Rebecca shared their findings. So they shared in a formal presentation kind of the work that they collected over the year. And it was really exciting to be able to share that with the community in a public forum. And we've been scraping by with not a whole lot of money, but we've been pretty committed to the fact that teachers are paid for their time. So even if we can't pay for community partners or for food or for other things, that we really want to honor the teachers and their time, because we know that time is precious, right? And in addition to that, I'll speak to that in a minute, we also did some open workshops that were open to any teacher in San Francisco Unified that were partnering with community partners. And that was a pretty exciting partnership that I'll share about in a minute. So, the Cal Academy of Sciences and the DeYoung Museum have been 2 of our primary partners, and they kind of simultaneously, it was sort of a perfect storm, because they were already talking about art and science, and geographically in San Francisco they're right across from each other, so they were like, let's talk about art and science integration. What does that look like? So they kind of identified these 5 skills: observation, investigation, interpretation, critical thinking, and communication, that pervade both the art process and scientific process. And sort of started looking at art integration with their students using science content. It's sort of, let's really talk about, what does it mean to observe? What does it mean to interpret? What does it mean when you're interpreting a text versus data in a science experiment? What does it mean when you're doing critical thinking about perspective versus critical thinking about an art piece? And giving students kind of hands-on experiences, and also tying that to jobs and saying, a conservator in a museum needs to understand decomposition because they need to be able to preserve this painting, or an exhibit design artist at the Science Museum needs to know how light changes what you look at in an exhibit, and those kinds of real life applications. So kids are thinking, like, this isn't just because my teacher said we have to learn it. There's a real life application out there. Then those 21st century skills, I'm not sure if this is something you're familiar with if you're not from San Francisco, but when Francisca Sanchez was there, there was a lot of work put into kind of identifying these toolkits. It's not new language. Obviously, all over the country, there's a lot of talk about 21st century skills. But the San Francisco Unified School District identified these 7 as sort of covering these sort of major topics. And so if you're interested, you can write your email, and I can email you the toolkits to share with you. They're pretty comprehensive toolkits with web resources and articles to read with your staff and to go deeper. But aesthetic sensibility, multicultural, multilingual competency, strength of mind, body, and character, social, civic, and environmental responsibility, critical and creative thinking, reasoning and solution seeking, multimedia communication, and technological fluency. And all of those, we felt like, well, if we're really talking about integrating in the 21st century, then we better sure be thinking about how are we asking students to articulate their understanding, and what is it that we're asking them to do. And What's the mode of their communication, and what are we expecting from them? So that was another layer that kind of got added on this year to think about those 21st century skills in the context of science and art integration. So some of the activities we did with the SLANT Fellows was look at the scientific process, creative process, made some observations about what we saw was similar and different, and gave them some readings by Dr. Julia Marshall about the creative strategies, and we really kind of took the process as sort of the pathway into integration, so using a strategy to be what brings science and art together. And we participated in skills investigations with community partners. So, for example, KQED came and did some work on, was it communication? We looked at media, critical media literacy and communication, kind of what are you learning from a video, what are you thinking, what are you questioning? They did some investigation with the Exploratorium, with sound and music, and some interpretation with 826 Valencia about storytelling and kind of how a story evolves when a whole group is participating collaboratively on a story. They created lessons and posted them online, and then we also tried, without too much success, but we tried to have this web online kind of community where when we're not together, you know, you can blog but that worked when we were together in the summer, and then, you know, teachers are busy people, so still trying to figure out how to make that happen. But like I said, they created assessments, and people like me, mainly me, were coming into classrooms to support, and that looked different in every classroom. Maybe it's, you need some materials, so I bring them to you, or you want to think about a lesson and plan it together, let's talk about it, or let's sit down with your grade level and kind of plan out what it is that you're planning to do as a group. So it really shifted depending on the teacher's need and expertise. So the creative strategies we're going to talk about briefly today and are articulated much more eloquently in this article are the following. Depiction is basically rendering something visible, what you see. So it could be scientific sketching, it could be a play, it could be a dance. It's something visual that you are, you know, communicating your understanding of what you see. Metaphor, obviously you've heard that one before, making some kind of connection to something more abstract and connecting the two things. Reformatting is when you take something from one format, say it's in a scientific discipline, and then you display it, present it in another way. So for example, you could go back one slide. Mark Dion is a famous artist that is referenced in this article as well. He classified twizzle sticks in this scientific way, and that's not really normally how twizzle sticks may be presented to you, but he organized them in a specific fashion. And mimicry, projection is when you're thinking into the future and kind of imagining a world. Michael presented this morning on projection about his dream houses and how the kids really created their own place that where they would include sustainable green features in their homes. And mimicry is where you actually take on the persona of another discipline. So then Mark Dion, actually the same artist, acts a lot like a scientist. He'll go out, he's an artist, but he'll go out and collect bones, and then in the museum he'll actually act like this scientist, and that's part of his whole exhibit, is that he's in there working, and that's his artwork. And so you could see how mimicry could be a lot of different things, because students could take on a persona of something that they're learning about or something they're curious about and kind of become that for a little while. And here the teachers at their follow-up are acting like field researchers, right? Survey geologists, where they went out into Golden Gate Park and they had to go and cull information from the park and then present why it was such a precious place and why it needed to be preserved. So they were acting like these field researchers. This is Rebecca Fall, one of our other focal teachers who's not here with us today. And she said, I have realized that I can't expect my students to be creative unless I am involved in the creative process myself. The SLANT training has given me this opportunity, which is truly a gift. And it seems like so often today especially in the last 10 years, a lot of professional development is sort of, here's your binder, this is what you have to do, this is how we're expecting to measure your progress, and go to it, and we'll come and check on you. And so our aim was really to try to provide a platform for some conversations and some support for resources, but it's really about you, the teacher, are your own architect of your classroom, and you are a professional and can make these decisions on your own, but we want to support you in that journey and give you what you need to make those decisions. So it's kind of a different way to think about PD. It's definitely not a binder, and it's a little messier because of that, but I think it's also that much more rewarding, I would hope, right? Right?
Yes.
That's why I brought them. So the open workshops that we had this year, we decided we wanted to offer more than the summer, and we wanted to have something to kind of pique people's interest throughout the year, especially if they couldn't participate in a longer professional development. So in October, we took one of those 21st century skills each time and offered this 2 workshop series. The first one in October was with the Cal Academy of Sciences and the DeYoung, and they looked at social, civic, and environmental responsibility. And they talked about kind of taking things from your environment and figuring out how to repurpose them, as well as being politically active in the environmental movement, and then looking at a particular artist who has sort of taken refuse from big corporations like Williams-Sonoma, Banana Republic, and things like that, and made these incredible gardens. So the idea that you can make something out of trash that is valuable and culturally valuable, and sort of what does that mean for a society when you can do that and really be honored in that. So that was really cool. And then in February, we did critical and creative thinking through scientific discovery and media analysis. We paired up with Mission Science Workshop, which is a San Francisco-based workshop that really is just that. It's an opportunity for students to do hands-on science. They do a lot of building and making things. So we did analyze some of the scientific process of kind of what's going on in your mind when you're watching this event that doesn't make sense to you. And then we also went to BayCat, which is a youth media organization in the Bayview in San Francisco, where they were able to analyze some student-produced media and talk about what are you seeing and what does that mean for you, and to kind of juxtapose those 2 experiences together. In March, we paired with Chrissy Field Center, which is through the Golden Gate National Recreation National Park, as well as KQED, and then LEDGE, which is Literacy for Environmental Justice. And we looked at people's relationship with the Bay. And so we looked at media. We also looked at some, actually brought some mud up from the dredges of the watershed, and also looked at some different maps. And what are maps telling us? What are they saying? What's the message that these maps are saying? What does it mean when a sewage plant is in your neighborhood? And what does it mean when it's really far away, removed, and covered? There are 2 sewage plants in San Francisco, and one in a poorer community is uncovered, and not really, it's an old system. The other one is on the west side, and it's all covered up, and nobody really knows about it. And sort of, what does that mean, and how does that impact people's relationship with the Bay? So that was really interesting too. And then April, our last one we just finished last week, was with the MOAD, the Museum of the African Diaspora, and the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. And both of those looked at food and kind of your relationship with food and your associations with food, the cultural, historical, and sort of environmental impacts of food. And we looked at food production. We looked at looking at your food landscape and your students' food landscape, kind of what's available, what are kids bringing into the school, what are assets that they're bringing in, so really trying to change the nature of the language that many of us, including teachers, I think, often tend to think in this deficit way. Oh, my kids are always eating hot Cheetos, or they always have a soda in their hand, instead of thinking, what are some of the assets that they bring to this community, and how can we shift that dialogue? So, oh, well, this student's mom knows how to make pupusas, and this is something that maybe we could bring into the classroom. Or this this child actually knows how to use an apple slicer, and that's an asset, knowing how to use a specific tool that could change the nature of food in our classroom. And so kind of examining that, and we watched Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk on the danger of a single story, and talked about kind of perspectives and how we can't even begin to know what somebody's experience is by just judging them, that we have to have a lot of conversations to learn about each other. So it was food for thought on a lot of different levels, which is really cool. So these are all the partners we worked with in the last year, and hoping to work with them again. They were fantastic. And so what I'd like to invite you to do now is just come up for the next, let's say, 10 minutes or so, and you can come and look at Lindsay and Michael's work. Michael brought his notebook from the summer that we did, and if you have any questions, you can just ask us informally before we start taking you through some of these creative strategies.
For this area
okay, so if we had more time, what we would do first is to have you sketch your object and do a detailed sketch, really give you some time. But we don't really have that much time, and we want to, you're all artsy fartsy folks, so we figured you know how to sketch, right? You know.
They still want to sketch.
Okay, I know you want to do it, but I'm just going to tell you that that's what we would do first, and that's like your opportunity for depiction, right? You pick this object, you draw it, you pay close attention, note details. So if you're dying to sketch, I'll let you do that a little bit in the next session, the next task. But the next task I'd like you to do is take a paper. I have some blank paper up here, or if you have a notebook you want to use. You don't have to sketch your object in the middle, but you can just place it in the middle. And then I want you to write any associations you have about your object. So it could be questions you have, notes, details that you're observing. It could be something it reminds you of. It could be representative of something, symbolic of something to you. So any associations you can write on the back too about your object. And I'll give you about, we go until 2:45, is that right? So let's say 10 minutes to do your association.
Right away when I grabbed this, I just was thinking of the story behind it. Like, gosh, who wore this? Was it a princess, or was it, and then there's a name in the back that you could barely see, and I wanted to, like, so I was more intrigued with the story part of it, but then the art person in me came out, and I'm like, oh, whoa, it's not symmetrical. Look at how it's crisscrossing in the line. It's not done, the way that they sewn it. You would think that they would go up this way and then come back down the way, it didn't.
What was that experience like for you? Was that hard to come up with some categories, or was it easy, or was it sort of... It was easy?
And it's funny because looking at other people's, I would have classified their things differently.
Right. So that's that perspective thing again, is that it really depends on who's looking at what and what they're thinking, and what your associations are with it. Even scientists have their own associations, but it's definitely not all objective. Right? Yeah.
And then going along that, well, there's so many things I'd love to share, but just picking one is that as a process, as artists and as scientists, you need to do this, which is compare how I did this to how you did this, because wow, that's a brand new insight that I didn't even consider, even though we're dealing with similar objects.
Yeah, that's scientific convention. You have to share your ideas so that you can learn from each other. Anyone else?
I think it really also, I've done it a couple times now with students as well as with adults, and it just amazes me every time that it really forces you to look at an object as, it's, the observation part is first, the drawing part. But then when you're categorizing it, you're forcing yourself to look at it again in another light. So you can just see how that's really going to help your students to observe and to see and analyze what they're doing.
Sometimes you have to actually look at the function.
Yes, the
That
cultural
could be another
value function, right? Yeah, we could have listed our categories, and that might have pushed your group's thinking and thinking, oh, we didn't try that. Let's look at our group art again. Right?
Or it can be two different ways of looking at something. You could do it one way one day, and then the same objects, do them a completely different way the next day, and see if we can find another way to do that. And once kids got started on it, I could see they would go crazy with this.
Because
Yeah.
it's all about connections. making
Yeah, a science
connections.
teacher at our school uses this lesson to introduce species, which is in the whole scientific
That's fun.
classification, goes right into that.
Yeah.
But it's fun because first he lets the kids do that with the animals too, before he teaches them the official.
Okay. They get to.
They get to like, yeah, and they come up with some unusual, they must do it 2 or 3 different ways.
I
And
could
so they have to pair animals in different ways.
I mean, my head just went off. If I took articles that I had used with my class for the entire year, things they'd already touched and seen and played with. I saw the candle from the FOSS kit, that would be energy to them, and then just let them go at it. They would have a blast because they already had enough background knowledge to start to categorize and use the vocabulary words. And then they could just go crazy with
And
that.
if you consider putting if you look at a lens, like a sort of layer to how you approach your objects, if you're looking at sort of from a scientific lens or a cultural lens, sort of how would you classify your objects differently if you're thinking artistically or you're thinking socially? And how might that change what you put your groups in and why? Any other comments about this exercise?
I like that each group had a different way of showing you ground.
Formatting, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And the directions given is.
And as a teacher, it's wonderful because you can already get a sense, like it's already an assessment.
Right, of what,
Right?
where
If you
your
don't
students
give
are.
them the hard structure already of what these things are, then it's just really quick assessment of where people are.
And like Lindsay shared this morning, like this object could go a long way if you wanted to write that story about the tiara, or you wanted to take it further and really do some deep investigation about your object. It could go in a lot of different directions. Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you have any other questions, I tried to. I have a website that's public on our School Loop website. That if you're interested, I can send you the link, and it has some resources and articles and talks and things like that. So you can just put your name and email up here, and I can send you the 21st Century Toolkits and that link. And be sure to take an article with you. And thanks for sharing your talk.